Before we start the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. And now, let's go. Story 1. By the time I got done writing that night, I was too tired to care that my wife, Simone, wasn't home. I figured she'd gone for a walk or something. When I woke up in the morning and saw that she wasn't in bed, my first thought was that she'd gotten up before me and went to the store. It wasn't until the evening that I realized she'd left me a voicemail in the middle of the night. It was a short message, less than 10 seconds. But when I think about it now, I think that most of the worst things that ever happen to you happen in 10 seconds or less. Probably most of the good things too. 10 seconds is enough time for a lot to happen. I know it took me less than 10 seconds to fall in love when I saw Simone for the first time, sitting by herself in the corner of the coffee shop I worked at, reading of all things. Beautiful jet black hair, a soft face, and round glasses. Like any straight college-age guy, it was normal for me to give some glances to pretty girls that walked in while I was working. But normally that's all it was, a quick glance then back to work. I never thought that I would be so unprofessional as to flirt with a customer, but for the first and only time in my 3 years working at the coffee shop, I walked over to this beautiful girl and introduced myself. We hit it off immediately. We talked about books, our hatred for annoying old people. We both worked in customer service and found out that we were going to the same college. We're both English majors, and we even had some of the same professors. Months later, she told me that the moment she realized she was going to give me at least one date was when I told her how lucky I felt to have a professor as knowledgeable and passionate as Dr. Ridge. You see, Dr. Ridge was perhaps the most made fun of professor in the history of education. During the first day in every one of her classes, Dr. Ridge would show a short PowerPoint presentation over her 17 bunnies, each with names like Dante, Raven, and Beowulf. That wasn't the embarrassing part. The embarrassing part was that she had a Facebook made for each one of her bunnies, and they all interacted with each other. Some of them were married and would post about their relationship struggles, only to argue online. Some of them were dealing with injuries or illnesses and posted poems about their pain. As you could guess, this did not go over well in freshman level classes. However, to hear Simone tell it, the fact that I looked past Dr. Ridge's quirks to see how intelligent and kind she was proved that I was worth a shot. Fast forward to the day of our 2-year anniversary. I'm starting my last semester of college, and Simone is only a few months behind me. We were at the nicest restaurant I could afford, talking about our future together for the 1,000th time. We planned to get married shortly after she graduated and then move somewhere far away from either of our families. I was going to teach high school English while working on my novels, and she was going to pursue her PhD and eventually become a literature professor. We finished dinner in high spirits and decided to go for a walk around the city. The ground was covered in snow and ice, and the street lights reflected off the ground. The way that Simone lit up made her look like an angel. She was the center of the world. We went through a local bookstore. My best friend Tommy was the clerk and gave me an employee discount on the book of Robert Frost poems I bought for Simone. When we were checking out, an old woman in line told us that we were about the cutest couple she'd ever seen. "You look just like my husband and I did," she said, then looked at me directly. "Don't ever let her go." "I won't," I promised. Drunk in love, we meandered through the city until we wound up at the underground subway station. In 20 minutes, there was a train going to a place in the city we'd never been through before. So we decided, screw it. We'd go check it out for no other reason other than to say that we'd experienced all the city had to offer. We spent our downtime sitting on a bench and playing sticks with our fingers. If you don't know how to play, Google it. Simone was always a much quicker thinker than me. She was better at chess, Sudoku, crossword puzzles, anything that took brain power. She had just beaten me for the 5th game in a row when I noticed a group of guys on the other side of the tracks. They were huddled together, but when I looked up, they all had their heads turned, staring directly at us. They noticed me and turned back to each other. I figured they were just some funny guys making jokes about us, sitting all lovey-dovey on the bench. Maybe they were checking Simone out. Either way, they were on the other side of the tracks. They were the furthest thing from a threat at the time. That's why I felt fine excusing myself to the bathroom a few minutes later. As I was washing my hands, I heard a scream and instantly recognized it as Simone's voice. I sprinted out and found her circled by all three men. The tallest one held Simone in a headlock so tight that he was lifting her off the ground. The other two were looking around for witnesses. When they saw me, they barreled toward me. Simone let out a muffled cry. For a second time slowed. I remember thinking to myself how incredible of a situation this was. Surely this would all just stop somehow, right? This type of thing didn't just happen. But it was happening, and the two men were only a few feet away from me. I had no chance in a fight. Even if it was just one of them, they were nearly twice my size. The one thing that I thought I might have over them was speed. Like a wide receiver juking a defender, I feigned as if I was going to run away. Instead, I cut back and ran towards a gap between the leftmost man and the tracks, narrowly escaping a 5-foot fall to the bottom. He reached for me, but I lowered my shoulder and barreled through his outstretched arm. I cut to the right and slammed into Simone and her assailant at full speed, bringing all three of us crashing to the ground. I ended up on top of the tall man and elbowed him in the ribs. As I rolled away, I heard a loud thud and a shriek. One of the other men had tried to grab Simone, but had instead pushed her into the tracks about 6 feet below us. I tried to stand, but then the man grabbed me by the ankle and pulled me so that I fell on my stomach and cracked my jaw so hard that I saw stars. I kicked my feet blindly and connected with his stomach. I got free and halfway to my feet before I was grabbed and put into a headlock. The grip was so tight, I was scared my throat was going to collapse. I flailed about and clawed at hands I couldn't see, but as deep as my nails went, the grip never loosened until he heard the horn. The train was coming. Simone's on the tracks. I was thrown to the ground, and a heavy boot stomped on my back and knocked the wind out of me. "Let's get the fuck out of here," one of them yelled. By the time I could stand, they were running away. Simone frantically clawed at the wall, trying to get up out of the trench, but she was a short girl, barely 5 feet tall. Although she could reach up to the platform above her, the edge was curved, making it too difficult for her to get a firm hold. I reached my arms down and tried to pull her up myself, but I just didn't have the strength. Maybe if we had a little more time we could have worked together, but the train sounded so close. It was going to burst through the tunnel any second. Once we saw the train, there wouldn't be enough time to react. There wasn't enough room down there for her to escape its girth. I allowed myself half a second to close my eyes and think and think and think. I pictured the train bursting through the tunnel and Simone screaming my name, standing against the edge of the tracks as it ran into and through her. I thought about the sound of her bones being crushed, about never seeing her again, about spending the rest of my life without her. I could try again to grab her, but the result would simply be the same. Her getting crushed while we held hands. There was no getting her up in time. There was only one scenario where I saw her surviving. "Go to the middle of the tracks and lay down," I said. Without hesitation, she let go of my hands, ran to the tracks, and laid down flat on her stomach with her arms firm against her sides. Just then, the train emerged from the tunnel. Her right arm was resting exactly where the wheels of the train would run. A little left. I screamed. She squirmed a half inch to the left just as she disappeared underneath the train. She screamed so loudly that I could hear her over the rumbling. She screamed and screamed until the train came to a complete stop. For a long second, I heard nothing except for the train doors opening and passengers holding their conversations that strung together like a bad choir. "Simone!" I screamed. I flagged down the operator, and he kept the train stationary until Simone was able to squeeze out. Together, we lifted her up to safety. I called the police and told them what happened, but none of the men were ever caught. I found that to be irrelevant. Simone was safe. For the next week, she stayed with me at my apartment. She cried in her sleep almost every night, but eventually she felt close to normal, only much less likely to take a late-night subway train. A couple weeks later, we were lying in bed, and I was the one crying. "I was so scared you were going to die," I said. "I couldn't stand to live without you, and I know that it was my fault. I should never have left you alone." She kissed a tear running down my cheek and hugged me close. "But you knew just what to do. You saved me. I didn't know what to do. I just said the first thing I thought of. I had no idea if the train was going to crush you or not. I just knew I couldn't get you out in time. I had to try something. Well, it worked. Why were you so confident in me? I asked. How come when I told you to lay down, you just did it? You're my boyfriend, she said. You're always there when I need you. You always do the right thing. I knew you wouldn't let anything happen to me. Years later, we had a beautiful wedding at the very same church Simone was baptized in as a baby. I sobbed as she walked down the aisle. We both sobbed as we said our vows. By the time we kissed, our faces were so wet that they slid against each other like two blubbery fish. We honeymooned in Greece, where we climbed the Acropolis. We held hands as we watched the sunset. I promised myself that, no matter what, Simone would be the important thing in my life. We were both on the precipice, about to free fall into the things we'd been dreaming about since we were young. And yet, I knew that whether I sold 1,000,000 books or zero, I was going to love Simone more than anything. She would always be my priority. Simone got accepted into one of the top English literature PhD programs in the country. So we ended up moving to an even bigger city. She focused on her classes and worked as a waitress on the weekends. I found a teaching job at a local high school and spent my evenings working on my novels. It was about a year into this new life when I began to find success. It started small. A publisher picked up my first book, a horror novel, and we were able to get it published in a short time with minimal edits. A couple dozen people picked up the book, and I got some solid reviews. Every week, a few more sales would roll in, and after some months, it looked like I might even break even. Then some girl on TikTok made a video with a title like The Most Disturbing Book of 2025. She gave a quick, spoiler-free summary of my book with lots of gasps and comments like, "You won't believe what happens next." At the end, she said that she didn't sleep with the lights off for a week after finishing the story. The video ended up going viral. Tens of millions of views and over 1,000,000 likes. Other book content creators started making summaries and reviews. Some people even posted live reactions of them reading the ending. People were speculating on whether or not the killer was actually dead. Would there be a sequel? Suddenly the book was selling so fast that the small book printer my publishers outsourced couldn't keep up. They had to hire a secondary team, and then a third, all just to print more and more copies. Edgy teenagers weren't exactly my target audience, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't in absolute bliss. I went to bookstores and saw entire displays with copies of my book. I started doing book signings and talks. I spoke on a panel with an author who's a household name. Even when the publicity started to die down, the book was selling at a steady rate. That's when my publisher gave me a deadline. 45 days to finish the sequel that I hadn't even planned on writing. My school understood when I quit with only a week's notice. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I had to strike while the iron was hot. Over the next month and a half, I did nothing except work on my book. I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice Simone feeling down around this time. We barely talked anymore. Sex was non-existent. She tried to get me out of my office for a date at least once a week, but I was always just so busy. I kept telling her that as soon as I finished the book, I'd spend all the time in the world with her. I remember being so frustrated that she just didn't get it. She got even more upset when I started drinking at night. Not a lot, but when you write and think for 12 hours straight, every single day, sometimes you just need something to help you relax. I yelled at her more than once during this time. I kept telling myself that I would start treating her better soon. But then a sequel turned into a threequel, and then I started a new series. There really never was a good chance for a break. I had this momentum, you see, and readers are fickle. There was always the chance that as soon as I took a breather, they were going to move on to something else. Simone started struggling to keep up with her coursework, and every time she tried to vent to me about it, I told her that if it was too much for her, she should just quit. I'm not quite sure when she did drop out, but it's safe to say I didn't notice for a few weeks. She just laid in bed and wouldn't even try to talk to me anymore. One night, I forced myself to stop writing a little early. I really did feel bad for her. I knew I was being neglectful. It just seemed that there was always something more urgent, and I knew she'd always be around once it wrapped up. That night, I booked a vacation scheduled for the next month, our anniversary. We'd go to Hawaii and stay in a nice resort. I won't do any writing for a whole week, I promised. It'll be just the two of us. When I told her, she just nodded, and I could tell she didn't believe me. But I meant it, I really did. It's just that, as we got closer to the vacation, I realized I was behind on my next book. We'd have more time if we could just postpone it by a couple of weeks. That would have worked just fine. except for the fact that the very day of our anniversary, she got run over by a subway train. I didn't listen to the voicemail until after the police called me to tell me she was dead. I was writing when they called. They said that she had laid down on the subway tracks, flat on her back, with her arms flat against her side. Witnesses said that it was almost like she was trying to hide under the train to avoid being run over. She almost did it too. If she was just one more inch to the left, she would have been fine. The first thing I did when I got off the phone was listen to her voicemail. I'm going to the subway station, the one closest to her house. I hope you'll meet me there. Somehow, despite everything, I know you will. I love you. All I can think about now is her lying there, confident that I was going to do something to save her. Did she believe that I was going to make it just in time? Did she die believing, like she did when we were young, that I would never let anything happen to her? Story 2. I'm writing this from prison. 2 weeks ago, I beat a man to death. It was broad daylight. There were plenty of witnesses. The gas station cameras caught everything. I see no reason to deny what happened. What was his crime? He made fun of my scars. When I confronted him, he threw a slushie at me. In response, I beat his face to a bloody pulp with my fists. Did he deserve it? Probably not. Didn't know the guy. Was it a crime of passion? In theory, yes. The whole situation, however, is a bit more complicated. I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness. Lord knows I'll probably get the injection. I've only come to this dark corner of the internet to explain myself. As I said, the events of that afternoon are complicated. Before I moved to Florida, I used to work in private security. The sort of private security that you're not meant to blab about, even if you know the end is near. For simplicity's sake, let's say I was a security contractor at a research facility in Antarctica. You know it's big and cold out there, but I'm pretty sure you don't know the extent of either of those adjectives. The facility which we were protecting was a far cry away from any hint of civilization. This was by design. That was by design. You don't set up shop in a frozen hellscape if you expect regular press conferences. Routine patrols around the vicinity of the lab would be conducted to ensure that no one was trying to get a peek, but the weather mainly kept those expeditions to the immediate surroundings. I went on nearly 100 of these security checks, and we never saw anything remotely suggesting human presence. All the guys would complain about the freezing temperatures and shit food, but that's just proper etiquette. You need to make conversation about something, and in the frozen waste, there isn't a lot of inspiration floating around. In truth, the job was easy. We'd gear up, trudge through the snow, and then spent most of our days drinking, complaining, and playing cards. In the late 2010s, the brass was cooking up something special. They wanted to be certain that there was no one anywhere near the facility that could spy on the research. There was a usual round of patrols around the direct perimeter of the base, but the bosses wanted us to check further. They wanted a team to go patrol an area that no one's been to for a solid 2 decades. Usually, for an expedition that remote, we would take a team of at least 7 people. The money from the trip would get split between the whole crew, and the paycheck would look no different than any other patrol. If the team was to be considerably smaller, however, the payday would be worth the freeze. It might be the guilt that's giving me selective memory, but I don't think it was my idea to run a skeleton crew. Regardless of who dreamed it up, it happened. We ran a team of 3, not including the Estonian that was in charge of the icebreaker. I knew the 2 others well, but we never spoke about family. I still don't know how much their kin know, and I'd hate for them to find out through me. So let's just call my 2 fellow travelers Red and Silver. Silver led the expedition. He'd been at the base years before I arrived and never spoke much. Didn't even know where he was from. Had the strangest accent that would bounce around all corners of the globe. All I knew of the man was that he enjoyed cigars and had spent 2 decades in the military of whatever mysterious place he had come from. Red was our comms guy, gutsy fella from somewhere in Latin America. Brazil, if I recall correctly. Few people complained about the cold as much as he did, and no one was able to string together as many expletives while doing so, but he was a reliable man in a pinch. Silver and Red both had rifles, and I rounded out the group Remington in case something got too close for us. None of us were too concerned about the weaponry. We didn't expect to use it. Even Silver, who had spent untold years out in the cold, had went his entire career without shooting at anything mobile. Main thing we were concerned about was getting enough thermal protection to not lose a limb to frostbite. The weather in Antarctica is never good, but when we left the base that morning, it was as normal as it gets. As we sailed beyond the borders of our usual patrol area, the wind started to pick up. By the time we were fully in uncharted territory, the world was a howling mess of snow and sleet. The Estonian captain, as usual, didn't say a word. He just puffed on his pipe and worked at the machinery. The man was silent, but even in his stoic face, I could see a twitch of anxiety. Silver, Red and me weren't in particularly good spirits either. When the storm picked up, Red's calm started to struggle. When the true force of the tempest descended upon us, they went completely dead. For a couple hours, the storm beat down on the icebreaker. The ship swayed from side to side, and at times it seemed like we might actually capsize. Everyone kept their composure, but you could cut the tension in the cabin with a butter knife. When the skies finally cleared around noon, we all breathed a sigh of relief. In the calm waters, Red kept us occupied with tasteless jokes about the Titanic. Despite the storm, we were making the trip in good time. Nothing of note had appeared during the journey, and there was little land left to cover before we'd turn around and head back to base. Just as we started to consider the expedition finished, however, the Estonians summoned us to the viewing deck. There was something in the distance, a structure of dark metal which stood out in the white snow like a nun at a rave. Once we crossed the distance, the black metal took shape into a walkway. Off in the middle of nowhere, in a corner of the globe where one can't survive without millions of dollars worth of equipment, sat a dock. I'm not one for architecture, but Silver called the dock Gothic. All across the structure, there were imposing spires which reached up towards the sky like crooked black fingers, and the pathway itself was made up of a jagged, unfriendly metal tile. Even though the skies were clear, Red's comms were still dead. There was no way for the team to call our findings in. Silver insisted that we immediately return back to base, tell the brass, and send a better equipped team to investigate. Red, being his usual reckless self, said we should at least see what's on the other end of the dock. The Estonian stayed silent, as he tended to do. I was the deciding vote. The mysterious pathway in the middle of the frozen wasteland didn't inspire any confidence, but my mind was quick to extrapolate what would happen if we returned back to base. The three of us would be told to rest. Another, bigger, expedition would be sent in our stead. We would be paid out for a regular shift. It's the backup team that would get the bonus. I wish I could say that it was Red who convinced me to continue with the patrol. That would lay the blame for what was to happen solely on his shoulders. Yet, lying to you or myself for that matter doesn't do anyone any good. I pushed for us to continue at my own behest. I convinced Silver to get off the icebreaker and onto the dark metal knot, because I thought it was safe to do so. I convinced him because I had debts back home. The jagged footpath led us away from the ship and around a massive mountain of ice. On the other side of the frozen wall, the black metal connected up to a dome structure. The building, much like the path that led to it, was covered in spiky ornaments that reached out towards the heavens. As we approached the entrance of the structure, Silver once again suggested that we call in backup. Seeing the unexplainable building in the middle of nowhere filled me with a fair amount of unease, but by then I was already committed to getting my paycheck. The entry into the dome was tight, with low ceilings. The bone-chilling cold of the outside world had seeped into the metal of the passageway. Although we were safe from the biting Antarctic wind, a frigid unease radiated from the black metal that surrounded us. At the end of the passage, the ceilings rose into a sort of lobby. The walls were covered by strange shapes that collapsed in on themselves in a show of eerie decor. At the center of the chamber stood a terrible statue, a bearded man with long hair made of black metal. The figure was covered in vein and muscle and wore a lab coat which barely covered its bulging form. There was a terrible scowl on the metal scientist's face, which implied a soul filled with rage and void of mercy. The statue towered above us like a monument to some cruel dead god. Kneel before your professor, read the inscription beneath the statue. Silver, once again, voiced his discomfort. I was willing to argue with him as we approached the strange structure, but seeing the statue made me partial to a retreat as well. There was something in that cruel face, in the discomforting shape of the chamber around us, that filled me with dread. Even though we were all armed with well-tested weaponry, I felt patently unsafe. Just as I was about to agree with Silver's suggestion of retreat, however, Red took initiative and ventured past the dark lobby of the structure. Cursing the young man's impatience, Silver and I followed. The metal dome rose above us, and the floor gave way to pure ice. We were standing at the edge of a sort of arena the size of a football pitch. The ground was uneven and pocked with signs of impact and battle. Yet the shape and size of the structure quickly became irrelevant. What captured our attention and filled my heart with another wave of discomfort was the frozen creature at the far end of the arena. A hippopotamus made of ice. I've only seen them in zoos when I was a child, but the creature was unmistakable. Its body was fully made of frozen crystal, yet beyond its frozen skin sat dark blue clumps reminiscent of organs. The ice hippo's body was only halfway out of the ground, as if it had been frozen in place. Though the creature was immobile, its massive translucent maw looked as if it could crush anything that was placed inside it. Silver and I demanded caution, yet Red would hear none of it. Immediately, he rushed over to the ice hippo to investigate. He laughed and made jokes and tapped against the creature's dull teeth. He was deaf to all our warnings. The ice hippo was a curiosity to him. He thought it a frozen sculpture. Silver saw it before I did. He raised his rifle and screamed at Red to back up, but by the time the words left his mouth, it was already too late. The clumps of dark blue in the ice hippo's skull started to pulsate with life. As if woken from hibernation, the crystalline beast started to move. Red pulled back when the creature's maw started to shift. Silver even managed to squeeze off a couple shots at the monstrosity's indigo brain. It was too late. With sickening speed, the ice hippo launched from the frozen ground and leaped at Red. It caught his arm in its dull teeth, crushing the limb in the process. Like a rabid dog killing fowl, the monstrosity whipped Red back and forth. Manic screams, punctuated by gunfire, echoed through the grand metal hall. Silver shot a burst from his AR at the creature's mass, and somehow, through the agony, Red managed to squeeze off a couple shots from his sidearm into the ice hippo's skull. All the bullets hit their mark, but it made no difference. The frozen monstrosity was not impeded by either of the weapons. What I was witnessing was maddening and incomprehensible, but the adrenaline that rocketed through my body made it no different from any other combat situation. Seeing my comrade in danger, I acted. With a sprint, I cut the distance between me and the incomprehensible. Once I was close enough to not miss, I squeezed off 2 shots from the pump action into the creature's maw. The first burst shattered a chunk of ice from the creature's jaw. The second completely unhinged it. Red came crashing to the ground, screaming and delirious. The ice hippo reeled back in confusion, its shattered jaw hanging uselessly. It roared in pain, a strange, high-pitched creaking sound which betrayed the beast's gargantuan size. Without thought, I grabbed my screaming comrade by his nape and started to drag him to safety. I squeezed the trigger a 3rd time, hoping to dissuade the creature from following us, but the shot went wide and hit the dark metal beyond. Although I missed, Silver was much more accurate with his plan of attack. As I dragged Red back to safety, the old soldier stepped out and threw a grenade. He landed the explosive straight in the creature's yawning maw. The explosion rocked the whole hall. By the time the frost settled, the ice hippo was just a pile of misshapen crystal and dark blue blood. The creature's jaw had the strength of heavy machinery. Red's arm was mangled beyond recognition. He was bleeding out fast. I helped Silver fasten a tourniquet, but it didn't do much to help. The damage from the hippo extended well past the affected limb. Red's uniform was drenched in blood, and the wavering tenor of his screams suggested he would never speak again. Saving the man seemed unlikely, but I had no intention of leaving him behind, at first at least. As we applied the tourniquet and lifted the dying man to his feet, another sound broke past Red's harrowed screams. Outside, a familiar high-pitched wail could be heard. Another ice hippo. Multiple ice hippos. We dragged our comrade through the tight metal passage. Once we got out into the frigid Antarctic wind, his fate became unavoidable. Even if we were alone, Red's chances of survival were slim. There were some basic medical supplies on the ship, but they were sparse and far. The walk to the icebreaker was at least half an hour when we were all capable of moving on our own. Dragging the man would slow us down considerably. Were we alone, there's a chance that Red might have survived the journey. Yet we were not alone. From the depths of the ice rose more of those crystalline monstrosities. With dull maws of horrid strength and pulsing azure organs, they lumbered towards us. I begged Silver to let go of Red, to leave him to his fate, yet the old soldier would hear none of it. He refused to abandon a member of the patrol. Even as the life drained from Red, the old soldier insisted we at least try to save our comrade. The ice hippos outside moved more sluggishly than the one we encountered inside of the metal dome. Were the two of us simply to run, we might have escaped them, even as Red's cries simmered down into groans. However, Silver refused to let go. I helped him drag the man for as long as I could, yet when one of those frozen monstrosities was just a few paces away from us, I let go. Red fell off the walkway and onto the ice. Limp, dead perhaps. Although we were being pursued by beings beyond comprehension or explanation, Silver's rage cut through the panic. He roared in fury and demanded I pick Red back up. As my commanding officer, he ordered me to do so. Silver ordered me to do so, yet he never finished his order. The nearest ice hippo let out a haunting howl into the wasteland. A blast of something horrid left the beast's frozen jaws. Before Silver finished off his order, he disappeared beneath a gust of freezing dust. A terrible pain spread up the right side of my face. The crystalline monstrosity's attack inflicted the kind of agony that scars a man for life. Yet in that adrenaline-fueled moment, I could see the world clearly with my one good eye. Silver stood before me, with Red dead in his arms. They were both frozen in place, turned immobile by the ice hippo's terrible breath. For a mere moment, I could see my old comrade's eye twitch. He was frozen, but he was still alive. The stinging pain surging through my skull washed out any hopes of rescuing Silver. It obliterated any semblance of cogent thought in my head. All my body could do was run. All it could do was run and scream and beg the Lord for survival. I do not know how I made it back to the icebreaker. I do not know what I said to the Estonian captain or to the brassback at base. I recall little from the moment I started to sprint back to the ship. All I know is that I spent about a week in treatment at the research base and was then sent off back to civilization to receive proper medical care. I spent months in Europe at a facility connected to my employers. The surgeons did their best to salvage the parts of my face that wasn't lost to frostbite. The officers questioned me over and over to try to bring some semblance of an explanation to what had happened. The shrinks did their best to bring a shred of calm to my soul. I spent months in recovery, yet by the time I was deemed fit to re-enter the civilized world, I felt no better for it. With a sizable payout for my service and silence, I packed up what little of my life I had and settled in Florida. I never wanted to feel cold again. I wanted to get as far away from any semblance of ice or frost and never have to think about what I had witnessed. Thoughts of the horror would not leave me, and the few bits of respite I would get in my waking life would worm their way into my dreams and consume me in terrors of the night. I drank and I smoked and harmed my body in many other ways in attempts to forget what I saw in that terrible black dome. With enough intoxicants, the memories would become distant, but they would never truly leave. It wasn't until I found myself confronted with a cackling youth in a gas station that the memory of that terrible day truly re-emerged. I thought I could keep my cool. I thought I would just smack the kid around and teach him some respect. The moment he threw his slushie at me, however, control over my body left me. I was back in that frigid hellscape. I was back before my two dying comrades, helpless to save them. I was back in Antarctica, staring down a terrible amalgamation of animal and ice. I was back, and I couldn't help myself. https://www.reddit.com/r/mjlpresents/comments/q2qjz1/%sign D2%sign 9 3%sign D 1% sign 8 B percent sign D 0% sign B percent sign D 1% sign 8 B percent sign D 0% sign B C percent sign D 0% sign B 8 underscore percent sign D 2% sign 9 B percent sign D 0% sign B percent sign D 0% sign B D percent sign D 0% sign B 4% sign D 1% sign 8 B percent sign D 1% sign 8 0% sign D 2% sign 9 3% sign D 1% sign 8B. Story 3. I took the janitor job at Claremont High because it was promised to be quiet, steady work. I like the night shift, the stillness, the routine. I'd clock in just after sundown, make my rounds through the halls and classrooms, maybe listen to a podcast while I swept the cafeteria. No kids, no teachers, no drama. Just me, the echo of my footsteps, and the low hum of old fluorescent lights. Most of the school was a tomb after hours, literally dead silent. But there was one room that never quite felt settled. The lost and found. Technically, it was just a side room off the gym, part storage, part dump zone for whatever kids left behind. I passed by it every night, and for the first few weeks, it was exactly what you'd expect. Jackets, notebooks, a single worn-out sneaker with no pair. Nothing strange. But then things started turning up that didn't belong. A navy blue hoodie with a crest I didn't recognize, though it did look like an altered version of our school's logo. A set of keys on a lanyard labeled Room 212, even though Claremont didn't number its rooms like that. A class photo, glossy, official-looking, with students I'd never seen before. The year on the bottom read 2009, which would have made sense, except the school didn't open until 2012. At first, I figured it was some leftover junk from the previous building or a harmless prank the kids were trying to pull on the new janitor. But the stuff kept showing up. More and more. Every night, I'd check the lost and found. There'd be something new sitting on the shelf. Items that somehow looked familiar, but felt off. Things with slightly altered logos. Textbooks belonging to students that didn't exist. I checked. A Polaroid from the roof, except the skyline was wrong. The city around the school didn't match. And the weirdest part? No one ever came to claim any of these items. I thought about saying something. I really did. I almost brought the Polaroid to the principal's office. But what would I say? Asterisk K. This photo doesn't seem to represent reality asterisk. I imagine the look I'd get, polite concern, maybe a note in my file. I'd seen guys let go for less. So I kept my mouth shut, kept doing my jobs without saying anything. Still, after the fifth item that made my skin crawl, I had to tell someone. So I mentioned it to Mr. Hargrove, the security guard that worked mornings. He just laughed and shrugged it off. Kids are weird, he told me. They're probably just trading stuff with friends at other schools. I told him Claremont didn't have any sister schools, but he ignored me and went back to watching the security cameras. That was the end of that, and the items kept coming. Some mundane, pencil cases, notebooks, scarves, but they always fell off. I can't really explain it, just a feeling I had about them. There was even a laminated ID listing Mr. Kowalski as vice principal. We didn't have a Mr. Kowalski. And that's when I started going down a rabbit hole. I was never much of a spiritual person, never thought about the paranormal. But this, in my mind, could only be explained with the existence of a different Claremont. One that was bleeding into ours. That's when I really started watching it. I'd sweep faster, even cut corners just so I could spend more time in that room. Some nights, I'd sit there for hours just staring at the unnatural items, try to piece together a rational explanation to it all, and failing to do so. Things didn't just appear. They'd be there when I arrived, like someone had set them down moments before. Always freshly placed, never dusty. One night, the room was colder than usual. I mean, like I was standing in front of an open freezer. The air stung my throat when I breathed in. I opened the door, and there it was, a mirror, full length, leaning against the back wall. I hadn't seen it the night before, and it was the biggest item of the bunch. Old, with a brass frame, foggy glass, the kind you'd find in an antique store, and one that you would never buy unless you wanted your house to be haunted. I didn't like the way it reflected the room. It seemed delayed, like the light took just a half second too long to bounce back. I leaned in and, I swear to God, for just a moment, I didn't see myself. I mean, I guess it was me, but it looked like me. Same uniform, same face, but his badge was distorted, unnatural. Just like the crest on the hoodie. He was smiling just a little too much. I blinked and it was gone. Stumbling back, I knocked over a box full of items and left the room without cleaning up. I didn't sleep well that night. Well, for multiple nights afterward. Kept dreaming about the mirror. Not about what I saw, but that I was inside it, locked behind the glass, pounding at the surface while something in my skin walked freely through the school. And still, I didn't quit. I documented. I kept a notebook in my pocket, used it to log anything new that had no logical origin. After a week, I had about 30 entries. Scarves, empty bags, 2 cell phones, both bricked, no SIM cards, and a yearbook. A yearbook. The school photo on the front was Claremont, but it was wrong. The angles were off, the front sign written in a font we don't use. And when I flipped it open, it only got worse. No one I recognized. Not a single name. Teachers I'd never heard of. Students with faces that almost looked familiar, but weren't. And page after page of clubs that didn't exist. The worst part was finding a photo of myself, standing beside a girl I didn't know. I was the single connecting link between the 2 schools, but my name was wrong by a single letter. Don instead of Dan. It didn't feel like a typo. It felt like a copy. I wanted to throw the mirror out. Smash it. Burn it. Anything. But I didn't. Curiosity's a hell of a thing, especially when soaked in fear. Next evening, after the halls cleared and the last teacher had left, I grabbed a flashlight and locked myself inside the room. I waited a while, just listening to any sounds I might hear. The hum of the hallway lights beyond the door. The faint tick of an old wall clock. I stood in front of the mirror, heart beating faster than I'd like to admit, and raised the flashlight. No delay, doppelganger, or anything out of the ordinary. Just me, tired and pale and staring a bit too hard. I moved the beam around the edge of the frame. It was dusty, thick with spider webs, a bit corroded in places. Strange, I thought. Nothing else shows signs of age. I placed my palm against the glass, which I regretted instantly. It was cold, then it rippled. Not much, just the faintest quiver, like disturbed water. I didn't have time to react. It started pulling. I felt my hand slowly but firmly sink in. I yanked back, but it was too late. The mirror grabbed me. It dragged me forward, and I fell through. No wind, no impact. Just an instant drop into somewhere else. It was the same school, same room, but it wasn't. The lighting was wrong, too dim, but not flickering enough. The lockers were the same layout, but the numbers didn't make sense. 107 was next to 33B. The paint was peeling where it hadn't been yesterday. And worst of all, the silence. Not just quiet, but wrong. Like sound didn't belong there. This was it. The other school. The one that, from my understanding, was trying to mimic what our school looked like. What felt like. But it couldn't. Not perfectly. My footsteps didn't echo. The floor should have squeaked under my boots, but there was no sound. Everything looked the same, but slightly wrong. Skewed angles, doorways that were either too tall or too narrow. The trophy case by the gym was filled with awards that didn't exist. I turned a corner and froze. There was someone down the hall. Not a student. Not a teacher. He was tall, too tall, in a way that made my stomach twist. His head was slightly tilted, and he was holding a clipboard in one hand, a mop in the other. I ducked into a classroom, one I knew should have been the art room. There were hundreds of drawings covering the walls, all of them of the real, original school. All of them showed me, from behind, from above, in classrooms as I was cleaning. Another had me standing outside the lost and found room, just before I touched the mirror. That's when I heard the footsteps, slow, echoing throughout the building. The door creaked open. Finally, sound and the tall man entered. He didn't speak, just stood there waiting. He looked like me. Same stance, almost matching uniforms. His nameplate was warped, melted looking, as if the metal had been twisted. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was mine, but too metallic if that makes sense. "This school already has someone like you." I stepped back, and he didn't follow. At first. Instead, he tilted his head further until it was nearly horizontal. The clipboard slipped from his hand and hit the ground with a wet thump. not the sound real plastic and paper should make. He raised the mop and tapped it against the wall 3 times, each making a louder and louder bang. A low moan, distant, maybe from below the floors or on the other side of the school. It wasn't a human sound, either, or it didn't sound like one. Without a second thought, I bolted right past the thing still standing like a broken mannequin. I didn't wait to see if he came after me. I just ran. I had to go back. I couldn't stay here anymore. It was too dangerous, I told myself. The school warped as I moved. Halls stretched and folded, lockers bent inward, entire door frames twisted like they were on fire. I even passed room 212, the one from the lanyard, and it was wide open. Inside was a spiral staircase descending into darkness, something red flickering at the bottom, eyeing me. That wasn't there before, not in my school. I remember the layout back to the lost and found room, but everything was being contorted. Once I reached the gym, my eyes were locked on the door. I jumped and barreled through it. Inside the mirror. I didn't think about it. I ran for it, and the mirror didn't resist. The world twisted again. I landed on concrete, or something like it. The walls were the same as my school, but the edges were too soft, the colors off by a shade. There was no ceiling, just a flat, endless gray sky, and across the room stood me. At first, I thought it was a mirror again, a trick, but it wasn't copying my movements. He stood calmly, his hands behind his back, and an almost reassuring smile on his face. "You weren't supposed to come back," he said. "You were meant to forget." I backed away. "What is this? Who are you?" He stepped forward. "I'm a version that stayed, the one that understood. The keeper doesn't punish. He preserves, replaces, thrives. You're not me." He gave a small, regretful smile. "Not anymore. The copy, the keeper, stepped aside. You were the last variable, the real you. But now you're contaminated. You've seen both worlds, and yet," he paused, carefully choosing the words meant to cut me deepest. "You don't belong in either." I looked past him. Behind the keeper was the mirror I came through, still intact. But it shimmered differently. It was wild, unpredictable, flashing images of my school, and something much worse. I understood. They weren't trying to trap or harm me, but overwrite, replace me. "Now, you'll be stuck here," the keeper said, almost with pity. "In nothingness. Oblivion. Not a great fate, I must admit." My eyes darted between the copy and the mirror, trying to mentally map out my next move. I ran for it. With the keeper's back turned, this was my best chance. I ran, not to escape, but to shatter it. My reflection in the mirror delayed, trying to stop me, but it was too late. I jumped against the frame of it, to snap it in half. The mirror shattered. Sound vanished, a deafening silence. The keeper shrieked, not through ears but inside my bones, before breaking apart like a bad transmission. The room began to bleed light from its corners, the gray sky turning blindingly white. I didn't wait to see what came next. I stumbled through a hallway that shouldn't exist, past doors that led nowhere, through walls that crumbled behind me as I moved. I ran until there was nothing left to run from. When I woke, I was yet again inside the lost and found room, surrounded by dozens of items that were normal, ordinary, and ones that belonged. The mirror was gone. Everything was normal again, and no one remembers anything strange. But I still check the hallways every night, just in case. And sometimes, when the lights flicker, I hear footsteps, and the air turns cold, unnaturally cold. https://www.reddit.com/r/thou order. Story 4. Most car radios are only built for FM and AM radio stations, but for some older models, there is a third option. I only now know as much as I do about shortwave radio stations because of all the research I have done, all the forums I've looked through, all the people I've talked to, maybe in some sort of bid to protect the only family I have, my little daughter. Shortwave radio is a mostly out-of-date format to broadcast radio internationally, country to country. It was mostly used during the Cold War as a way for the Soviets to communicate to soldiers overseas. Many of you have probably heard of the mysterious Russian number station. That was a shortwave station. Nowadays, shortwave is mostly used by amateur radioists. But this is not that. I am writing this as sort of a warning to anyone out there. Please just stay away from shortwave radio. At least for now, something bad is going on that even I'm not sure of. We were driving. That was all. I'm a single father to my daughter, Lisa. She's 8 and she's everything to me. We were driving on a stretch of forested highway on the way to my mother's house. Not much signal out there, so we were listening to the radio. I remember murmuring to myself about a missing page of stamps that I didn't know what happened to, as Lisa was reaching forward from the back seat playing with the radio tuner. I was pretty zoned out, getting hypnotized by the long, windy highway roads, until Lisa snapped me out of it. She must have switched the tuning from FM to shortwave. Didn't even know she knew how to do that. Look, Dad, listen to this. I blinked quickly, being snapped out of my daze, and I heard static at first, but then \asterisk click \asterisk sound started coming through. There was still static, but there was now sound coming through. It was circus music, cheap-sounding circus music, if that makes sense. And then a jolly voice came through, well, hello, kids. It's Marvelous Mervo here. I have another fun story for you today. This one's about Billy. The voice was somewhat low quality, but he had some sort of accent that I couldn't put my finger on. Mervo continued on about some story about Billy, and how Billy didn't pray before bed and got in trouble with his parents. Religious children programming? On shortwave? I was a little freaked out, but more confused. After a long-winded story, he signed off. Children, it's very sad for me to say, but that's all the time we have today. Before I go, let's celebrate some of our great adult followers from around the world. Follower 25, follower 144, follower 95. I clicked the station off before he could finish and switched it back to the Classic Hits FM station I was listening to earlier. Hey, turn it back on, Dad. Lisa yelled at me from the back. I'm sorry, honey. Dad wants to listen to some of his music. I said calmly back. What I didn't let on to Lisa was how absolutely spooked I was. Something didn't feel right about that station. It sounded like it came straight out of a horror movie. I made a mental note to come back to it later. Soon we reached my mother's house. Me and Lisa were planning on staying there for a week or so to spend some time with my mother, who we don't see too much. By the time we got there, it was already late afternoon, so after having dinner with my mother, I went to tuck my daughter into bed in the guest room. As she laid down, I noticed a small portable radio sitting in the corner of the guest room, which made that weird feeling come back from earlier. I decided to say something about it to Lisa before I kissed her goodnight. Hey, listen, honey, that station you were listening to earlier, I don't want you listening to that again. Okay, but why, Dad? She said softly back to me, I just don't want you to, all right? I will be very mad if you do. I said sternly, all right, Lisa said in a sad tone, not looking me in the eyes as she said so. Later that night, I sat in the living room thinking about that radio station. My mother tried to calm my nerves by giving me a smoke, but it did not work. Soon I found myself walking back out to the car to try and tune to that station that we stumbled upon earlier. The thing about shortwave stations is that they don't have exact call signs like FM, so I was sitting in my car, dead of night, searching through shortwave stations, making myself feel like I was going crazy until I found it again. It seems like I caught old Mervo mid-sentence, as the familiar circus music and jolly voice of unknown origin filled the car. You know, kids, many people question our beliefs. They are false prophets. That's all they are. Many of your parents are false prophets, but they don't understand that the gods came down and told us what he wanted and what they needed to live. Then there was a pause. He then quieted down and spoke more seriously. Remember, children, tune in every night. That's what God wants. Follower 34. Stay on alert for messages from him. I quickly turned off the radio. That last sentence, it sounded like a threat. Needless to say, I wanted answers. I wanted to call the police. I didn't, though, because what if I was just going crazy? Maybe this was just a normal Christian station, but all this talk of followers made me think otherwise. I decided to do my own research. I laid on my mattress later that night and typed away on my computer. I ended up on a forum, the HF Collective. It seemed to be a forum for shortwave hobbyists and amateur operators to catalog frequencies or oddities. I made a post there describing the station and the frequencies I found it at and asked for any help. Hours later, I got a response. You just found 5HK1DZ. Nobody's heard anything from it since 2005. Probably shouldn't go messing around with it. The user, GH0SDQL, attached a low-quality screen cap of an old HF collective newsletter dated August 9th, 2005. It had a tiny write-up asterisk, strange, unlicensed intercept. 5H, K1DZ heard broadcasting odd religious material. Possibly a prankster or an actual cult. Any operators who hear anything concerning should report to the FCC immediately. It has no traceable source. Asterisk, I asked if anyone knew where it broadcasted from. Another user answered. His response chilled me. I think the transmitter moves. It seemed to be spotted all over the place. Last I heard, some user traced it back to some city in Russia. We stopped looking into it though. We didn't want to stick our heads where they didn't belong in contrast to the people of this forum. I most definitely did want to stick my head where it didn't belong. I still couldn't itch the feeling that there was something bad behind this that involved children. The next day, me, Lisa, and my mom went to a local park and spent the day there. While Lisa was playing with some other kids, me and my mom spoke. You know, Lisa's been talking about some new bedtime friend she has, must be an imaginary buddy or something. My mother said to me, I snapped back, it better not be that damn shortwave station again. I told her not to listen to that again. Mom, take that radio out of the guest room. She obliged. Later that night, I reminded Lisa to just not listen to the radio at all. I went back out to the living room and then out the door to my car again and onto the radio. Then I found what I was looking for. The station chimed on around the same time that I caught it the previous night. But it was not the same jolly voice that I had heard the previous nights. This time he was angry, and the audio was more distorted, and there was a child there with him. Child Mervo told you many times. Sometimes God gets hungry, and God needs children's sacrifices. You would do anything for him, wouldn't you? The child snapped back. Please, Mervo, let me go home. The child's voice was distant, as if they were across the room from wherever Mervo was speaking. Why, you little dash? Mervo yelled this. Then there were shuffling noises. Then there was radio silence. This silence only lasted a few seconds. Then the distorted circus music and jolly voice came back on. I'm sorry about that, children. I thought I told you children that obedience is key. What did I just hear? I quickly picked up my phone to call 911, but just as I was about to, I heard the one thing I didn't want to hear. In good news, one of our new friends, Lisa, is about to get a warm visit from follower 34. I dropped my phone. Oh no, God, this can't be happening. There were a million thoughts rushing through my head, but I got up and ran into the house. I reached her room and slammed open the door, and there was Lisa, awake, sitting calmly by that damn radio, listening to that station. I snatched the radio and threw it against the wall. Lisa, didn't I tell you not to listen to the radio? Lisa ignored what I said and yelled back, looking at the now broken radio on the ground. Hey, I was listening to that. That was my favorite show. She said. I said back, favorite show? You just start de-listening to it a few days ago. Lisa looked at me and then looked down. I've been listening to Mervo at home since before I showed you while we were in the car. I didn't tell you because you didn't seem to like it. I stood there, speechless. I said calmly, why was he talking about you on the radio? Well, he told us to send him a letter introducing ourselves and where we lived. So I took some of your stamps and mailed to the address he gave. We didn't stay in Grandma's house long. We all rushed down to the nearest police station and filed a report on what happened. I kind of find out later, while an investigator is talking to me, that the night Mervo mentioned Lisa getting a visit, neighbors reported a guy breaking into our house through the back window back home. He said they arrested the man, but couldn't ID him. He had no papers, just a big 34 tattoo on his left arm. They said the police have reason to believe that the man was planning on kidnapping Lisa because of some tools found on him. The station is now under FBI investigation, and hopefully they placed us in a safe location where those people can't find us. I still can't wrap my head around what happened, and I fear that this could be something bigger than we could imagine. These followers around the world, kidnapping children and bringing them to God knows where. For my safety, I'm no longer looking into this and leaving it to the cops. I'm even using a proxy to post this, just in case. I beg whoever is reading this to please not to tune to any shortwave station, and don't let your kids anywhere near it. Just stick to FM. That's it for today's Creepy Reddit Tales. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and sticking around. You guys keep this channel going, and I'll be back soon with more stories that'll make your skin crawl. Drop a comment if you've got your own spooky tale to share, and I'll see you in the next one.